We're going to look at a few different types of cable needle for knitting, and I'll show you how to use each one, but we'll talk about the pros and the cons. The most common thing you'll run across is a U-shaped cable needle. It's relatively easy to use. It makes it rather difficult to drop stitches, so a lot of people like this and it's very popular. This is another variation on the same thing with a slightly different angle. It won't affect usability. This is another version that you'll come across. You slip the stitches onto one side, they're held here while you work, and then you slip them right off the other. This runs a slightly higher risk of losing some stitches, but I find it easier and quicker to work with than the U-shaped needle that's more common. These little birch cable needles are absolutely my favorite. You can see that there's a subtle taper in the center and a little bit of a thickening on either end. That usually suffices to hold your stitches in place during the short time that you're doing your cable. And again, this is my favorite type, but it does run a slightly higher risk, again, of losing your stitches if you're not careful during your work. Let's say that you don't have a cable needle handy and you just have to do a cable. I've gone as far as using a paper clip, but a double-pointed needle is always a good solution. Just be aware that there's nothing here to hold those stitches in place while you work, so you just have to be extra careful while you work the cable. Okay, let's see how to use each of these little cable needles with just a simple 2/2 cable. So what I'm going to do is pick up my U-shaped needle, slide my 2 stitches onto the needle, hold in front, knit 2 stitches, and then I can either slide these back onto this working needle and then back onto the holding needle, but generally what I do is I'm going to work those stitches right off of the cable needle. And I've completed my cable cross. We'll look at how to use a different type of cable needle. And again, we're just gonna do a 2/2 cross. So I'm going to take my stitches, slide them onto the cable needle. You can see how they rest nicely in that little divot. And then I'm gonna work my 2 stitches. I'm going to work the next 2 stitches directly off the cable needle. You can see that it's a little easier to use than the U-shaped cable. And then you can see that I've worked my cable cross. Okay. All right, my favorite type of cable needle, the little Brittany birch needles. What we will do is, again, a simple 2/2 cross. And I'm going to slide my stitches onto the needle, hold them in front, knit my 2, and then I can knit them right off the other end. I think what I like the most about these is that they are most like a normal knitting needle. So for me, I find that my favorite. The last thing we're going to look at is how to use a double-pointed needle if you don't have a cable needle on hand. So again, I'm at the point where I want to do a 2/2 cross, so I pick up my double-pointed needle, slide my 2 stitches onto the DP, hold that in front, and work 2 stitches, and then I'm going to knit 2 directly off the other end of my DP needle, and I have worked my cross. So the one thing to keep in mind when you're selecting your cable needle that we haven't talked about is that you probably want to match the size or thickness of your cable needle to the yarn you're working with and the needles that you're working with. It's not absolutely necessary, but it will give you a somewhat more even result. What we're going to do today is look at a few different types of cable needles for knitting. The most common type that you're going to run into, Scotty, sweetie, yeah. The most common thing you're going to run into is a U-shaped needle. When you are putting your your stitches onto the needle, you're going to put them on this end, and then you're going to work your cable and slip them off the other end. This is a variation on the same thing. Let's